Hello guys, Dr. Spooks here. If you enjoy my videos, please click the like button. It's the only way YouTube's algorithm really notices me. I would be very grateful to you. The Appalachian Trail always had a way of pulling people in. And for Corey, Rachel, Mike, and Tara, it was more than a hiking route. It was tradition. For the past 5 years, they'd carved out 1 week every autumn to trek its rugged paths together. It was their escape from the grind of modern life, a retreat into the wilderness where cell service vanished, and the world felt vast and uncontainable. Corey, the unofficial leader, checked his map while the others loaded their gear. He was the planner, meticulous and methodical, traits that had saved them more than once when trails grew faint and weather turned. Beside him, Rachel adjusted her hiking pack. She was the skeptic, the first to question every strange sight or sound in the woods, but also the one who kept morale high when things got tough. "Are we sure this is the right trailhead?" she asked, squinting at the dirt path ahead. Mike, the jokester, groaned dramatically. "Rachel, we've done this like 100 times. We'll be fine. Unless Corey's map-reading skills have finally failed us." Tara, the quiet one with a keen eye for detail, gave a soft laugh. You'd miss the trail signs even if they were neon. Despite their banter, there was an undercurrent of excitement. The Appalachian woods were alive with autumn's fiery colors, the air crisp and electric. This year, they'd chosen a less traveled route, one Corey had found while poring over forums. It promised isolation, stunning vistas, and a challenge they couldn't resist. The first few miles passed uneventfully. They fell into their usual rhythm, Corey leading, Rachel navigating, Mike cracking jokes, and Tara snapping photos of everything from moss-covered rocks to distant peaks. But as the afternoon wore on, a subtle unease crept into their journey. The woods felt too quiet. "Anyone else getting déjà vu?" Mike asked as they paused by a stream. Rachel rolled her eyes. "You always say that when we're hiking. It's probably because these trails all look the same." "No, seriously," Mike insisted. "I swear we passed that rock before." Corey glanced back at the trail. It did look familiar, but that wasn't unusual in dense woods. He shook it off and motioned for them to keep moving. By the time the sun dipped low, casting the forest in deep shadows, the feeling had intensified. Trees seemed to shift in the periphery, and the trail ahead felt both familiar and alien. When they reached a small clearing to set up camp, Corey couldn't shake the nagging thought, hadn't they camped here before? Tara hesitated as she unpacked. "It's weird, isn't it? Like we've been here before." Rachel snorted. "Probably just tired. Let's eat and crash. Tomorrow we'll feel normal again." But none of them truly believed that. The night settled heavily over the forest, a quiet so profound it felt oppressive. The crackle of the campfire was the only sound cutting through the stillness. Corey leaned back against his pack, the orange glow of the flames casting dancing shadows on the surrounding trees. Rachel stirred the pot of instant chili over the fire. "This trail might be remote, but it's too quiet. I don't like it." Mike grinned, poking at the fire with a stick. "Maybe Bigfoot's out there watching us." Tara glanced up from her notebook where she'd been sketching the trees. "If Bigfoot's real, he's probably smarter than us. I'd stay hidden too." Despite the banter, there was an undercurrent of unease in the group. As the hours stretched, the forest seemed to close in tighter around them. Corey's instincts, usually sharp and reliable, couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. It started small. Rachel was the first to notice it. While searching for her flashlight, she swore she'd put it in her pack, only to find it lying on the ground outside her tent. "I know I didn't leave this out here," she muttered. "Maybe you're sleepwalking?" Mike joked, but the laugh that followed sounded hollow. Then, while fetching water from the nearby stream, Corey noticed the air around him seemed thick. Sounds became muffled, and the woods seemed to shimmer faintly as though caught in a heat wave. When he blinked, the sensation was gone. Back at the campsite, Mike stared into the fire, unusually quiet. "Is it just me, or does this feel wrong, like we shouldn't be here?" Rachel groaned. "What's with you guys tonight? It's a trail. Trees, dirt, same as always." Corey spoke up, his voice careful. "I felt it too. When I was at the stream, it's like the air felt heavier and everything looked distorted for a second." "That's called being tired," Rachel quipped, but her tone betrayed her unease. As the fire dwindled, they finally decided to call it a night. They retreated to their tents, but sleep didn't come easily. Corey lay awake, staring at the fabric of his tent as shadows flickered faintly across it. He told himself it was the fire's dying embers, but the unease coiled tighter in his gut. He wasn't the only one. In her tent, Tara sat upright, her sketchbook open. She had drawn the clearing earlier, a simple scene of their campfire surrounded by trees. But now, as she looked at it, the sketch had changed. There was a faint shape in the background, hovering above the trees, a sphere, blurred but unmistakable. Her heart raced as she flipped the page and drew again, this time focusing on the thing she thought she'd imagined. As her pencil moved, the memory became sharper, a faint glowing orb floating silently among the treetops. "Tara?" Corey's voice startled her from outside. "You awake?" She hesitated. "Yeah, what is it?" I think we need to talk." Stepping out of their tents, they were all greeted by the same sight. The forest was no longer dark. In the distance, just beyond the clearing, a faint light glowed among the trees. The light was faint but unmistakable, casting an eerie silver glow through the trees. It pulsed gently, like a heartbeat, drawing their eyes and holding them captive. Corey stood at the edge of the clearing, his hunting rifle slung over his shoulder, gripping the strap tightly as the others emerged from their tents. "What the hell is that?" Rachel whispered, her voice unusually quiet. "Whatever it is, it's not natural," Tara murmured, clutching her sketchbook like a shield. She didn't mention what she'd drawn earlier, but her gut twisted at the sight of the orb, now visible to everyone. Mike, usually the first to crack a joke, was silent, his face pale in the dim light. He finally broke the stillness. "Do we check it out? Or do we pack up and get the hell out of here?" Corey's instincts screamed to run, but something in the light seemed to hold him in place. It wasn't just curiosity, it was a pull, an almost magnetic force urging him to step closer. "Stay here," he said, his voice steady. "I'll go look. If anything happens, you run." Rachel grabbed his arm. "Like hell you're going alone. We stick together." After a tense pause, Corey nodded, and the group moved as one toward the light. The closer they got, the more unreal the orb appeared. It wasn't resting on the ground or tethered to anything. It hovered in the air, perfectly still, about 10 feet above the forest floor. Its surface was smooth and metallic, yet it glowed faintly as though lit from within. Strange symbols flickered across its surface, incomprehensible and alien. "It's beautiful," Tara said softly, her voice tinged with awe. Rachel's hand twitched toward her phone, but she hesitated. "Should I take a picture? What if—" Before she could finish, the orb emitted a low hum. The sound resonated deep in their chests, vibrating through their bones. Corey's hand went instinctively to his rifle, but he held his fire, his every nerve on edge. The hum grew louder, more insistent, and the orb pulsed brighter. A sudden, blinding flash of light swallowed the group whole. Corey felt a rush of air as if he were falling, his stomach flipping violently. Then, nothing. When he opened his eyes, the forest was quiet again. The light was gone, and the orb was nowhere in sight. Corey sat up, his head spinning. "Everyone okay?" Rachel groaned, rubbing her temples. "What the hell was that?" "I don't know," Corey said, scanning the trees for any sign of the orb. "But it's gone." Mike glanced around, his eyes narrowing. "Wait, is it just me, or does this look like where we started? We're at the same camp." "That's what I mean," Mike said, his voice rising. "We just walked for 20 minutes toward that thing. How are we back here?" They froze as the realization sank in. The clearing looked identical, down to the placement of their tents and the remains of the fire. Corey checked his watch, and his blood ran cold. The time hadn't changed. Corey stared at his watch, the glowing numbers taunting him. It read 9:47 p.m., the exact time they had seen the orb. His pulse quickened as he glanced around the clearing. The fire pit was still smoldering, exactly as they had left it. His pack sat where he'd dropped it earlier. It was as though the past half hour had never happened. "This doesn't make any sense," Rachel said, her voice wavering. "We were gone for at least 20 minutes. How is it still the same time?" Tara clutched her sketchbook, her knuckles white. "Maybe we imagined it," she whispered. "The light, the orb, everything. Maybe we're just—" "No," Corey interrupted, his tone sharp. That wasn't our imagination. Something happened out there, and now we're back here. Mike stood abruptly, pacing around the campsite. This is insane. We walked toward that thing, and now it's like we've been reset or something, like we didn't leave at all. Reset? Rachel echoed, her face pale. What does that even mean? Are you saying we're in some kind of time loop? Corey didn't answer immediately. He scanned the woods, his hunter's instincts on high alert. The trees loomed like silent sentinels, unchanged from the moment they had set up camp. The quiet was oppressive, but it was more than that. It felt wrong, unnatural, as though the forest itself were holding its breath. We need to test this, he finally said, his voice calm but firm. Pack up your gear, we're leaving. Leaving? Mike barked a bitter laugh. To where? If we're stuck in some kind of loop, won't we just end up back here? Maybe, Corey admitted, but we can't sit here and do nothing. If we're being messed with, we need to figure out how to stop it. Reluctantly, the group began packing. Every movement felt surreal, as if they were going through the motions of a dream. Rachel kept glancing at her phone, but it refused to show a signal. Tara silently stuffed her sketchbook into her bag, her hands trembling. They left the clearing, retracing their steps down the trail. Corey took point, his rifle slung across his back, every step measured and deliberate. Rachel stayed close, her flashlight cutting a narrow path through the darkness. After 10 minutes, the tension began to ease. The trail ahead looked unfamiliar, a good sign that they were making progress. But just as Corey began to feel a glimmer of hope, the air around them shifted. It was subtle at first, a faint hum, barely audible, vibrating through the trees. Corey froze, his hand instinctively going to his rifle. The others stopped behind him, their breaths shallow. "Do you hear that?" Tara whispered. The hum grew louder, more insistent. The forest around them seemed to shimmer, as though caught in a mirage. Then, without warning, the world lurched. Corey stumbled, grabbing a nearby tree for balance. His vision blurred, his stomach twisting as though he were falling. When the sensation passed, he looked around, and his heart sank. They were back in the clearing. The tents were there, the fire pit still smoldering. The group stood in stunned silence, their packs still on their backs. Rachel broke the silence, her voice trembling. No, this isn't real. We didn't just... We did, Corey said grimly, his jaw clenched. We're back. It's the same place, the same time. Mike dropped his pack and kicked a nearby log in frustration. This is a nightmare. What the hell is happening to us? Tara opened her sketchbook, flipping to the page where she'd drawn the orb. The faint hovering shape seemed to glow faintly under the firelight. She turned to Corey, her voice shaking. It's the orb. It has to be. It's keeping us here. Corey nodded slowly, his gaze hardening. Then we need to figure out what it wants, or how to stop it. The clearing felt smaller now, like the forest had closed in around them. The air carried a suffocating weight, as if the woods themselves were alive and watching. Corey paced near the fire pit, his rifle resting against his shoulder. He felt the frustration bubbling in his chest, but he couldn't afford to lose control. Not yet. We need a plan, he said, his voice steady despite the growing unease. Sitting here isn't going to solve anything. A plan? Mike snapped, throwing his pack down. How do you plan for this, Corey? We're stuck in some kind of freaking time loop with a glowing orb messing with our heads. Mike, yelling isn't going to help, Rachel cut in, though her tone carried its own edge of panic. She crouched next to her pack, digging through it for anything that might provide answers. Maps, a compass, even a flashlight with a different beam. Everything felt useless. Tara, sitting cross-legged near the fire pit, clutched her sketchbook to her chest. Her usual calm demeanor had cracked, and her eyes darted nervously toward the surrounding trees. It's not just the orb, she whispered, barely loud enough for them to hear. It's the forest. It feels wrong, like it's watching us. Corey stopped pacing and turned to face the group. We can't think like that. Whatever's happening, we're going to figure it out. First, we need to test the limits of this loop. If we keep ending up back here, then we have to find out why. And how exactly do we test it? Rachel asked, exasperated. Walk in circles until the orb shows up again? Corey knelt by the fire pit, grabbing a stick and using it to draw a rough diagram in the dirt. We split up just for a short distance. Each of us takes a direction, marks our trail somehow, and we meet back here in 10 minutes. Mike raised an eyebrow. Split up? In this situation? That's the dumbest idea you've ever had. No one's going far, Corey said, his tone firm. We need to know if there's a pattern. Maybe we'll see something different if we're not all together. Reluctantly, they agreed. Each of them grabbed a piece of chalk Corey had in his pack and headed in separate directions, marking trees as they went. Corey moved west, his rifle in hand, his eyes scanning every shadow. He kept his steps slow and deliberate, his mind racing with possibilities. After about 5 minutes, he stopped. Something felt off. The forest ahead looked identical to the forest behind him. He turned, following his chalk marks, only to realize they led him directly back to where he'd started. What the? He muttered, his grip tightening on the rifle. He wasn't the only one. Back in the clearing, Rachel was the first to return, her face pale. I didn't even go that far, but I ended up walking in circles. The marks on the trees, some of them were already there. Mike burst back into the clearing moments later, his breathing ragged. Same thing. I swear I kept walking straight, but it was like the trees were moving. Tara arrived last, her expression blank. She sat down by the fire without saying a word, flipping open her sketchbook. On the last page, she'd drawn something new. A dark mass, indistinct but unmistakably alien, hovering just beyond the edge of the clearing. Rachel peered over her shoulder, her voice trembling. What is that? Tara shook her head. I don't know. I didn't see it, but I felt it, like it's out there, waiting. Corey's jaw tightened as he stood and surveyed the group. The tension was palpable, their fear tangible. He gripped his rifle tighter, his resolve hardening. Whatever's happening, he said, it's not random. This orb, this loop, it's trying to keep us here. We need to figure out why before it's too late. The forest felt like a living thing, an oppressive presence pressing down on them from all sides. Even the wind seemed to have stilled, leaving only the distant hum, faint but persistent, like a warning they couldn't escape. The group sat around the dying fire, the flickering flames casting long, distorted shadows. Rachel broke the silence, her voice low and tight. This isn't just the orb. It's bigger than that, the forest, the air. It all feels wrong. Corey nodded grimly. It's like we're in someone else's territory, and they're watching us. Someone? Mike's laugh was hollow. Try something. Whatever's behind this, it's not human. Tara, still clutching her sketchbook, spoke up. What if it's not just the orb? What if it's them? Who's them? Rachel asked, frowning. Tara hesitated, her fingers trembling as they traced the edge of her sketchbook. UFO sightings, she said finally. There's a history of them in the Appalachians. Strange lights, disappearances. People talk about orbs showing up before they're taken. That's just conspiracy theory junk, Rachel said, but her voice lacked conviction. Campfire stories. Are you sure about that? Corey asked, his gaze steady. Because what we saw wasn't a campfire story. That thing, it wasn't natural. Mike leaned forward, his elbows on his knees. You're saying this is aliens? Like actual aliens messing with us? Tara nodded slowly. What if the orb isn't just some random phenomenon? What if it's part of a trap? Something to keep us here, study us, or worse? The words hung in the air, heavy with implications. None of them wanted to admit it, but the pieces fit too well to ignore. The déjà vu, the time loop, the unshakable feeling of being watched. It all pointed to something far beyond their understanding. Corey stood abruptly, his rifle slung across his back. We can't just sit here and wait for whatever's behind this to make the next move. We need to do something. Like what? Mike asked, his voice tinged with desperation. We've tried leaving. We've tried splitting up. Nothing works. Corey's jaw tightened as he stared into the dark woods. We confront it. The orb or whatever else is out there. If it's keeping us here, it has to have a reason. Maybe if we find it, we'll find a way out. That's insane, Rachel said, but her voice wavered. What if it's a trap? It probably is, Corey admitted. But it's better than sitting here, waiting for the same thing to happen over and over. The group fell silent, the crackle of the fire the only sound. Finally, Tara spoke. If we go back, we'll need to stick together. No splitting up, no running. We face it as a group. Corey nodded. Agreed, everyone, grab your gear. We move now before the loop resets again. They packed quickly, the fear in the air giving their movements a sharp urgency. Corey took point as usual, his rifle at the ready, while the others followed close behind. The hum grew louder as they approached the spot where they'd first seen the orb. The air felt thick, charged with a strange energy that made their skin prickle. When they reached the clearing, the orb was there, hovering silently above the ground. Its glow was stronger now, its surface alive with shifting, incomprehensible symbols. Corey held up a hand, signaling the group to stop. "What now?" Rachel whispered, her voice barely audible over the hum. Corey's eyes stayed locked on the orb. "We see what it does. If it tries to reset us again, we fight back." They waited, the tension mounting with every passing second. Then the orb pulsed, its light growing blindingly bright. The hum rose to a deafening pitch, and Corey felt the world begin to tilt. "Hold your ground," he shouted, bracing himself against the wave of energy crashing over them. As the light consumed them, Corey caught a glimpse of something beyond the orb. Shadowy figures, tall and thin, standing just beyond the clearing, watching. And then everything went dark. Corey's eyes snapped open, and he found himself lying on the ground, staring up at the canopy of trees. His head pounded, and his limbs felt heavy, as if he'd just woken from a deep sleep. For a moment he thought the loop had reset again, but as he pushed himself up, he realized something was different. The fire pit was gone. The clearing was gone. They were somewhere new. "Corey," Rachel's voice broke through the haze. He turned to see her kneeling beside Mike, shaking him awake. Tara was nearby, already on her feet, her sketchbook clutched to her chest like a lifeline. "Everyone okay?" Corey asked, his voice hoarse. Mike groaned as he sat up, rubbing his temples. "Define okay, because my head feels like it got hit by a freight train." Tara pointed to the woods surrounding them. "This isn't the clearing. We're somewhere else." Corey scanned the area. The forest was denser here, the trees taller and twisted unnaturally, their bark dark and slick as if coated in oil. The air smelled metallic, and the hum, though fainter now, still vibrated in the background. His grip tightened on his rifle. "Stay close," he said, his tone commanding. "We don't know what's out here." Rachel moved to his side, her flashlight cutting a narrow beam through the oppressive darkness. "Do you think we broke the loop? Or is this part of it?" Corey didn't answer. He didn't know. All he knew was that they weren't safe. They began walking, sticking close together as they navigated the unfamiliar terrain. The woods felt alive, shifting around them with every step. Shadows moved where there shouldn't have been any, and strange shapes flickered in their peripheral vision. Every now and then, Tara would stop, flipping to a blank page in her sketchbook and hurriedly drawing what she thought she saw, a distorted tree, a strange symbol, a flash of light. "What are you doing?" Rachel hissed after Tara stopped for the third time. "I don't know," Tara admitted, "but it's like I have to, like something's putting these images in my head." Corey motioned for silence. "Focus. If this is part of the loop, we need to figure out how to stop it. Tara, keep drawing if you think it's important, but don't fall behind." They pressed on, the hum growing louder with each step. The forest seemed to thicken around them, the trees so close together they had to squeeze between them in places. The metallic smell grew stronger, and the air felt charged, making their skin prickle. Then they saw it. The orb was ahead, hovering in a small clearing, but it wasn't alone. Surrounding it were three tall, thin figures, their forms indistinct but undeniably humanoid. They moved with a strange, fluid grace, their limbs bending in ways that shouldn't have been possible. Mike's breath hitched. "What the hell are those?" "Not human," Corey whispered, raising his rifle. "Stay behind me." The figures turned as one, their featureless faces locking onto the group. The hum shifted, rising in pitch, and the orb pulsed brighter. Corey felt the air around him ripple, a wave of energy pushing against his chest. Rachel grabbed his arm. "Corey, don't—" Before she could finish, one of the figures moved. It was impossibly fast, crossing the clearing in a blur. Corey fired instinctively, the rifle's crack shattering the unnatural silence. The figure recoiled, the shot hitting its torso and leaving a shimmering wound that closed almost instantly. "Run!" Corey shouted, firing again as the group bolted back into the forest. Tara clutched her sketchbook, Rachel dragged Mike by the arm, and Corey brought up the rear, his rifle ready as the figures pursued them. The forest seemed to twist and shift as they ran, the trees forming walls and corridors that guided them toward something unseen. The hum grew louder, and Corey felt a deep, gnawing certainty. They were being herded. Corey's lungs burned as he sprinted through the oppressive forest, his boots pounding against the uneven ground. Behind him, the shimmering figures moved like specters, their steps eerily silent despite their impossible speed. He fired another shot over his shoulder, the rifle's crack echoing through the woods. The figures slowed momentarily, but didn't stop. "This way!" Rachel shouted, grabbing Mike's arm and pulling him toward a narrow break in the trees. Tara followed closely, clutching her sketchbook like a talisman. Corey brought up the rear, his rifle ready, his every instinct focused on keeping them alive. The forest opened suddenly into another clearing, smaller and less distinct than the one where they had first encountered the orb. In the center was something unexpected, a weathered leather-bound journal lying on the ground, its pages fluttering in a faint breeze. The sight of it made Corey skid to a halt. "Keep going," he barked, but Tara froze, her gaze fixed on the journal. "Tara, move." I think it's important," she said, her voice trembling. Without waiting for a response, she darted forward and grabbed the book, clutching it to her chest as though it held the answers to everything. The shimmering figures emerged from the trees, their forms bending unnaturally, their movements liquid and alien. Corey fired twice more, aiming to slow them down. "Go, now!" The group plunged back into the forest, following a faint trail that seemed to materialize before them. The hum grew louder and the air thickened, but the figures didn't pursue. Instead, they stopped at the edge of the clearing, their featureless heads tilting in unison as though watching. They ran until their legs gave out, collapsing near the base of a massive, gnarled tree. Corey scanned the area, his rifle trained on the shadows, before nodding to the others. "We're clear, for now." Tara flipped open the journal, her hands shaking. The pages were filled with scrawled handwriting, diagrams, and strange symbols similar to the ones they had seen on the orb. Some of the words were smeared, the ink faded, but enough remained legible. "What does it say?" Rachel asked, leaning over her shoulder. Tara read aloud, her voice barely above a whisper. "They come when the orb calls. They study us, trap us. The loop is their experiment. The only way out is through." "Through what?" Mike asked, his voice rising in panic. "What does that even mean?" Tara flipped to another page, where a crude map of the forest had been sketched. A marked location near the center was labeled with a single word: threshold. "It's a doorway," she said, her voice steadier now. "Whoever wrote this thought there's a way to break the loop by going through this threshold. It's connected to the orb." Corey's brow furrowed as he studied the map. "If it's a way out, we have to try. But getting there won't be easy. Those things won't let us go without a fight." Mike groaned, running a hand through his hair. "You're saying we go deeper into this nightmare? We don't even know what's waiting for us." "We know what happens if we stay," Corey said, his tone firm. "The loop will reset, and we'll be back at square one. This might be our only shot." Rachel nodded reluctantly. "I hate to admit it, but he's right. If there's a chance we can end this, we have to take it." Corey glanced at Tara. "Hold on to that journal. If it has more clues, we'll need them." Tara tucked the book into her pack, her grip tight. "Let's go before they come back." The group rose to their feet, their exhaustion giving way to grim determination. Corey adjusted his rifle, scanning the woods as they set off toward the marked location. Every step felt heavier, the hum vibrating in their bones. The forest seemed alive, reshaping itself with each passing moment. And somewhere in the distance the orb pulsed, its light a beacon drawing them deeper into the unknown. The forest grew denser and darker as they pressed on, the towering trees twisting together overhead like a suffocating cage. The hum that had followed them was now a constant vibration, a low-frequency thrum that seemed to resonate deep in their bones. Corey led the group with his rifle in hand, scanning every shadow for movement. Behind him, Rachel and Mike followed closely, with Tara clutching the journal like it was their only tether to reality. "Are we even going the right way?" Mike asked, his voice taut with fear. "This place feels endless." Tara pulled the journal from her pack and flipped to the crude map, her fingers trembling as she traced their path. "We're close. It should be just ahead." Corey slowed his pace, motioning for silence. The forest seemed to ripple around them, the air growing thick with an unnatural energy. As they rounded a cluster of twisted trees, they saw it, the threshold. It wasn't a physical door, but a shimmering rift in the air, like a tear in reality itself. The edges of the rift pulsed with the same light as the orb, its interior swirling with colors and shapes that defied comprehension. It was both beautiful and terrifying, a sight that made Corey's stomach twist. "What the hell is that?" Rachel whispered, her voice barely audible. Tara held up the journal, flipping to a page covered in frantic handwriting. "The threshold is the key. To escape the loop, we must enter. But the Watchers, they will stop us." As if summoned by her words, the hum shifted, growing louder. The shimmering figures emerged from the trees, their forms bending and twisting unnaturally as they closed in. There were more of them now, at least a dozen, their movements fluid and predatory. "Here we go," Corey muttered, raising his rifle. "Stay behind me." The first figure lunged, its speed almost too fast to track. Corey fired, the shot hitting the creature square in the chest. It staggered, but didn't fall, its wound shimmering and closing before it could do any real damage. Another figure rushed from the side, and Corey pivoted, firing again. This time the shot tore through its leg, slowing its advance. "Go!" he shouted. "Get to the threshold!" Rachel grabbed Mike's arm, pulling him toward the rift. Tara followed, clutching the journal tightly. Corey held his ground, his rifle cracking with every shot as he fought to buy them time. The figures moved in unison, their focus entirely on him. One of them reached him, its elongated arm swinging like a blade. Corey ducked, drawing his sidearm and firing point-blank into its head. The creature fell, its form shimmering and dissolving into the ground. But the others didn't hesitate. They kept coming. "Corey, come on!" Rachel screamed, standing at the edge of the threshold. Corey fired one last shot, then turned and sprinted toward the rift. The hum reached a deafening pitch, the air vibrating so intensely it felt like it might tear apart. The figures closed in behind him, their movements faster and more frantic, as if they sensed their prey slipping away. He reached the threshold just as the nearest figure lunged for him. Without thinking, Corey grabbed Rachel's hand and leaped into the rift, the world dissolving into a kaleidoscope of light and sound. For a moment there was nothing. No ground, no sky, no sense of up or down. Just an overwhelming sensation of falling and the distant hum, now almost musical, echoing in the void. Then everything went dark. Corey's senses returned slowly, as if he were surfacing from deep water. The first thing he noticed was the silence. The omnipresent hum, the oppressive weight of the forest, both were gone. For the first time in what felt like an eternity, the world was still. He opened his eyes. The group was sprawled on the ground around him, groaning and disoriented. They were no longer in the forest. Instead, they were lying in a wide-open meadow under a sky filled with stars. The air was crisp and cool, carrying the faint scent of grass and wildflowers. It was peaceful, too peaceful. Where are we?" Rachel asked, sitting up and rubbing her head. Mike groaned, pushing himself to his knees. "Are we out? Did we make it?" Corey scanned the horizon. The meadow stretched endlessly in all directions, with no sign of trees, trails, or anything familiar. His rifle was still in his hands, and he checked it instinctively, his fingers steady despite the lingering adrenaline. "I don't know," he said, "but it's different. That's something." Tara sat up, clutching the journal. Her face was pale, her eyes wide as she flipped through the pages. "The map? It's gone," she said. "All the writing, it's faded." Rachel crawled to her side, peering over her shoulder. Sure enough, the once crammed pages were now blank, as if the journal had never been written in. "What the hell does that mean?" Corey stood, scanning the meadow again. "It means we're not in the loop anymore, but that doesn't mean we're safe." Mike gestured to the sky. "Safe? Look at this place. There's nothing here. No glowing orbs, no freaky shadow people. Maybe we're finally free." Corey's gut told him otherwise. The meadow might have been a reprieve, but it didn't feel like an escape. There was something unsettling about the stillness, the way the stars above seemed too bright, too perfectly aligned. He adjusted the strap of his rifle and looked at the group. We need to move. Sitting here won't get us answers. Reluctantly, the others stood, their exhaustion replaced by a simmering unease. They began walking, sticking close together as they crossed the open field. Every step felt heavier, the silence oppressive. No birds called, no wind stirred the grass. It was as though the world itself were holding its breath. After what felt like hours, they stopped. The meadow stretched on endlessly, unchanged. Rachel turned to Corey, her frustration boiling over. "We're walking in circles, aren't we? This place isn't real." Before Corey could respond, Tara gasped. "Look." They followed her gaze. In the distance, faintly glowing in the dark, was the orb. It hovered just above the ground, its surface smooth and metallic, its symbols shifting like liquid light. "No," Rachel whispered, her voice trembling. "Not again." Tara opened the journal, hoping for answers, but the pages remained blank. Her hands shook as she closed it. "It's not over. It was never over." Corey tightened his grip on his rifle, his jaw clenched. "We leave a record this time. If we're trapped again, someone else needs to know what happened." Tara nodded, handing him the journal. Corey opened it and began writing, documenting everything they had seen, everything they had done. The others watched in silence, their faces a mixture of fear and resignation. When he finished, Corey placed the journal on the ground, its cover facing up. He looked at the group, his expression grim but determined. "We go again, and this time we find a way out." They turned toward the orb, its glow casting long shadows over the meadow. One by one they stepped forward, their silhouettes disappearing into the light. The meadow was silent once more, the journal lying undisturbed where Corey had left it. Its blank pages fluttered faintly in the still air, waiting for the next hands to find it. I know it sounds crazy, but this all started with a random post I found while messing around on the dark web. It was late at night, and I was just scrolling through weird forums, looking for something interesting to read. That's when I saw it. $100,000 for winning a game of hide and seek. The venue, an old abandoned warehouse. Sign up if you dare. At first I thought it was a joke. I mean, who gives away that kind of money for playing hide and seek? But the more I thought about it, the more curious I got. The promise of easy money can make you do stupid things. And I guess I was feeling pretty stupid that night because I decided to sign up. The instructions came quickly. They sent me a map, a time, and a list of rules. We were supposed to meet at this old creepy warehouse on the edge of town. The rules were simple. Hide and don't get found until dawn. If you managed to stay hidden, you'd win the money. The only catch was that the seeker was a clown. Yeah, a clown. As if that wasn't creepy enough. In the days leading up to the game, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. I kept having these nightmares about the warehouse and the clown, but I convinced myself it was just nerves. After all, it was just a game, right? The night of the game, I showed up at the warehouse just before midnight. The place looked even creepier in person. It was this huge, falling-apart building with broken windows and graffiti all over the walls. There were a few other people there too, all looking as nervous as I felt. Nobody said much. We were all just waiting for the game to start. This guy in a dark suit came out to explain the rules again. His face was mostly in shadow, which made him even more unsettling. He told us we had 10 minutes to find a hiding spot. The clown would start searching at midnight. If we were found, we were out of the game. If we made it to dawn, we'd win the money. He had this weird tone in his voice, like he knew something we didn't. It gave me chills. When he said go, we all ran in different directions. I sprinted through the dark hallways, my heart pounding. Every room I passed looked worse than the last. I finally found this tiny closet at the end of a long hallway and squeezed inside. It was cramped and smelled awful, but I didn't care. I just needed to hide. I sat there trying to calm my breathing. Minutes felt like hours. I could hear the other players moving around, but their sounds got quieter as they found their own hiding spots. Then everything went silent. At exactly midnight, the lights flickered and went out. The warehouse plunged into darkness. I could hear my own breathing, loud and shaky. And then I heard it. This low, creepy laugh echoing through the halls. The clown had started searching. The sound of its footsteps got louder, and the laughter seemed to be coming from everywhere. I held my breath, trying not to make a sound. My heart was beating so hard I thought it might give me away. The clown was close, and every second felt like an eternity. As the hours dragged on, the fear started to mess with my head. I couldn't stop thinking about my family and friends, but the more I tried to remember their faces, the harder it got. It was like they were slipping away from me. I started to realize this game was more than just hide and seek. It was doing something to us, erasing us. The laughter got louder, crazier, and I knew the clown was nearby. I felt like I couldn't breathe, but I was too scared to move. Then suddenly the laughter stopped. The silence was even worse. I waited, expecting the clown to jump out at any moment, but nothing happened. Finally, I couldn't take it anymore. I had to move. Slowly, I opened the closet door and stepped into the dark hallway. The place looked even worse than before. The floor was covered in debris, and the walls were cracked and peeling. I moved as quietly as I could, trying to find a way out. Every shadow seemed to move, and I kept hearing faint whispers of laughter. It felt like the clown was everywhere, watching me. I passed room after room, each one more destroyed than the last. The air was thick with dust and mold, making it hard to breathe. But I kept going. I had to find a way out. After what felt like forever, I saw a door marked Exit. My heart raced as I pushed it open, only to find another dark hallway. Panic set in. There was no way out. This place was a maze, designed to trap us. Desperation took over. I wandered through the endless halls, feeling my sanity slip away. The clown's laughter echoed in my ears, a constant reminder that I was trapped. I started to lose hope. There was no escape. Then I saw it. A figure at the end of the hallway. My heart stopped. It was the clown, standing there, staring at me. We locked eyes, and I felt a chill run down my spine. Slowly, the clown raised its hand and beckoned me forward. I knew it was over. The game was done, and I had lost. After I saw the clown standing there, my heart felt like it was going to explode. This thing wasn't just a clown. It was a nightmare come to life. Its makeup was all smeared, its grin way too wide, and its eyes, those eyes just stared right through me. I didn't know what to do. Running seemed like a bad idea because it would probably just chase me. I had to move, though. I slowly edged along the wall, trying to stay as quiet as possible. The clown just stood there, not moving, but I could feel its eyes following me. My heart was pounding so hard I thought it might hear it. Step by step, I inched past the open doorways, looking for another place to hide. Then, the clown started laughing again, that horrible low laugh. It made my blood run cold. I tried to stay calm, but I stumbled and knocked over an old chair. The noise echoed down the hall, and the clown's head snapped towards me. It started walking, its footsteps echoing off the walls. I panicked and ran as fast as I could down the hallway. I could hear the clown behind me, getting closer. I turned a corner and saw a heavy metal door. Without thinking, I pushed it open and slipped inside, slamming it shut behind me. I was in a dark room filled with old broken machinery. It smelled like rust and mold. I hid behind a big piece of machinery, trying to catch my breath. My mind was racing. I had to find a way out of here. But every time I thought about the exit, I remembered how the warehouse seemed like a maze. It felt like the place was trying to trap me. I stayed hidden for what felt like forever. The room was silent, but I knew the clown was still out there looking for me. I couldn't stay in one place for too long, though. I had to keep moving. I crept out from behind the machinery and made my way to another door on the far side of the room. Just as I reached for the handle, I heard breathing behind me. I turned around, and there it was, the clown, standing in the doorway I had come through. Its grin was even wider now, its eyes locked on mine. I backed up, fumbling for the door handle behind me. My hands were shaking so much I could barely grip it. Finally, I got the door open and slipped through, slamming it shut behind me. I was in another dark hallway just like the last one. I didn't stop to catch my breath this time. I kept moving, knowing the clown was right behind me. I needed to find somewhere to hide, somewhere the clown wouldn't find me. I turned corner after corner, trying to lose it in the maze of hallways. I found another door and ducked inside, ending up in an old office. The furniture was overturned, and papers were scattered everywhere. I quickly hid under a large desk, pulling a pile of papers in front of me for cover. I tried to steady my breathing, listening for any sign of the clown. The room was silent, but I knew it was still out there, searching for me. I needed to rest, even just for a moment. My mind was racing with fear and exhaustion. As I lay there, I noticed something strange about the papers scattered around me. They were old employee records, but the names and faces seemed familiar. I picked one up and froze. The face staring back at me was mine. My heart sank as I realized the truth. This wasn't just a game, it was a trap, designed to erase us from existence. I remembered the guy in the suit, his cold voice explaining the rules. If we were found, we'd lose more than just the game. We'd lose our lives, our identities. No one would remember us. We'd be erased completely. I had to get out of here. I couldn't let the clown find me. But how? The warehouse was a maze, and the clown seemed to know every inch of it. I couldn't run forever. I needed a plan. I peeked out from under the desk, scanning the room for anything that could help me. There was a window, boarded up, but maybe I could break through. I slowly crawled out, trying to be as quiet as possible. Just as I reached the window, I heard it again. The laughter. It was closer this time, just outside the door. I had no choice. I grabbed a heavy metal chair and swung it at the window. The glass shattered, and I started pulling at the boards. The noise was loud, too loud. I knew the clown would hear it, but I was desperate. I managed to pull one board free, just enough to squeeze through. I climbed out into the cold night air, my heart pounding with relief. But I knew I wasn't safe yet. I had to keep moving, had to find a way out of the warehouse grounds. I ran through the overgrown yard, the sound of the clown's laughter still echoing in my ears. As I made my way towards what I hoped was the perimeter, I realized something chilling. I couldn't remember how I got here. I couldn't remember who I was before the game. The warehouse had taken more than just my chances of winning. It had taken my memories, my identity, and if I didn't get away, it would take my life. I had to keep running. I had to survive. But deep down, I knew the clown wasn't done with me yet. The game was far from over. So after I managed to get out of that room and ran into the yard, I just kept moving. I didn't stop to think. I just kept going. The warehouse was surrounded by this tall, rusty fence. I knew I had to find a way out before that clown caught up with me. As I was running, I saw this old shed near the edge of the property. It looked like it hadn't been used in years, but it was my best bet. I made my way to the shed and slipped inside, closing the door as quietly as I could. Inside, it was dusty and filled with old tools and junk. I crouched behind some shelves, trying to stay hidden and catch my breath. My heart was pounding, but I needed to think straight. I knew running wasn't going to save me forever. I had to figure out what was going on. Why was my memory fading? Why did it feel like this place was erasing me? And who was behind this sick game? I found an old flashlight in the shed. It barely worked, but it was better than nothing. I started looking through the piles of junk, hoping to find something useful. In the back of the shed, under a pile of old newspapers, I found a small, dusty box. Inside, there were some old documents and photographs. The documents were blueprints of the warehouse. They showed hidden passages and rooms that weren't on the regular map. This place was a maze, way more complex than I thought. The photographs were even creepier. They showed groups of people, all looking scared just like I felt. Some were standing in front of the warehouse, others were inside, hiding. And in every photo there was the clown, always watching, always grinning. The dates on the photos went back decades. This game had been going on for a long time. One photo caught my eye. It was the guy in the suit who gave us the instructions. He was standing next to the clown, both of them looking like they were enjoying themselves. It hit me then. This wasn't just a random game. It was something much darker, something planned. I had to find those hidden passages. If I could use them to get around without being seen, maybe I could escape. I studied the blueprints, trying to memorize where the entrances were. There was one not far from the shed, near the back of the warehouse. I carefully made my way out of the shed, keeping low and moving quickly. I stuck to the shadows, trying to avoid making any noise. As I approached the warehouse, I found the entrance to one of the hidden passages. It was a small door, covered in ivy. I slipped inside and found myself in a narrow, dark corridor. The walls were lined with old pipes and wires, and the air was damp and musty. I followed the passage, my flashlight flickering. The corridor twisted and turned, leading deeper into the building. Eventually, I found another door. I pushed it open and stepped into a small room filled with old filing cabinets and dusty boxes. This must have been some kind of storage room. I rummaged through the cabinets, looking for anything that might help. In one of the drawers, I found more documents. These were records of the game, lists of names and dates. As I scanned the pages, I realized all the names were of people who had disappeared over the years, people who were never found. The game wasn't just erasing us, it was taking us out of the world completely. The realization hit me hard. If I didn't get out of here, I'd end up like them, forgotten, erased. I needed to find a way to stop this. There had to be a reason why the clown and the man in the suit were doing this. Maybe if I found them, I could put an end to it. I took the documents with me and continued through the hidden passages. I had to be careful. The clown was still out there, and it seemed to know these passages as well as I did. Every now and then, I'd hear its laughter echoing through the walls, sending chills down my spine. As I moved deeper into the warehouse, I started to hear other sounds, whispers, faint and distant. It was like the voices of the people who had played the game before me, all trapped in this place. I tried to block them out, but they only got louder. Finally, I reached another hidden room. This one was different. It was filled with old monitors and control panels, like some kind of security room. The screens were dusty and cracked, but they still worked. I could see different parts of the warehouse, all empty and dark. Then one of the screens flickered to life, showing the clown moving through the halls. It was getting closer, searching for me. My heart pounded as I realized how close it was. I had to keep moving. But before I left, I noticed something on one of the desks, an old journal. I opened it and started reading. It was filled with notes about the game, written by different people over the years. They all talked about the same things: the warehouse, the clown, the man in the suit. They had all tried to escape, but none of them had succeeded. One entry stood out. It was written by someone who had been in my position, someone who had almost made it out. They wrote about a final room, a place where the game could be ended. But it was dangerous, guarded by the clown. If I could find that room, maybe I could stop this. I took the journal with me and left the security room, following the directions in the notes. I moved quickly but carefully, knowing the clown was close. The hidden passages twisted and turned, but I kept going, driven by the hope that I could end this nightmare. Finally, I reached a large metal door. This was it, the final room. My heart pounded as I pushed the door open and stepped inside. The room was dark, filled with old machinery and wires. In the center was a large metal box with a keypad. I approached the box, my hand shaking. The journal had mentioned a code, but I couldn't remember it. I flipped through the pages, trying to find it. Just as I did, I heard the clown's laughter behind me. It had found me. With shaking hands, I entered the code into the keypad. The box clicked open, revealing a large red button. This was it. The end of the game. I reached out and pressed the button, hoping it would stop the clown. The room shook as the machinery came to life. The lights flickered, and the clown's laughter grew louder. But then, just as quickly as it started, it stopped. The lights went out, and everything went silent. I stood there in the darkness, my heart pounding. Had it worked? Had I stopped the game? As I waited, the silence was broken by a single sound, the sound of a door opening. I turned and saw a light at the end of the room. It was an exit. I ran towards the light, my heart racing with hope. I burst through the door and found myself outside, the night air cool and fresh. I had made it. I was free. But as I stood there, catching my breath, I realized something. The memories were still gone. My family, my friends, my life, all still a blur. The warehouse had taken them from me, and even though I had escaped, I knew I would never be the same. The game was over, but the nightmare would never end. When I got out of the warehouse and into the yard, I just kept running. I was so scared. The fence around the place was tall and rusty, and I had no idea how I was going to get out. I kept looking for a way out, hoping I could find something before the clown caught up to me. As I ran, I saw this old shed near the edge of the yard. It looked like it hadn't been used in years, but it was the only place I could think to hide. I slipped inside and closed the door quietly. The shed was full of old tools and junk, and it smelled like dust and mold. I crouched behind some shelves, trying to catch my breath and figure out what to do next. I knew I couldn't keep running forever. I had to find out what was happening. My memory was getting fuzzy, and I felt like I was disappearing. I needed to understand why. I found a flashlight in the shed. It barely worked, but it was better than nothing. I started looking through the piles of junk, hoping to find something useful. In the back of the shed, under a pile of old newspapers, I found a small, dusty box. Inside, there were some old documents and photos. The documents were blueprints of the warehouse. They showed hidden passages and rooms that weren't on the regular map. This place was a maze, way more complex than I thought. The photos were even creepier. They showed groups of people, all looking scared, just like I felt. Some were standing in front of the warehouse, others were inside, hiding. And in every photo there was the clown, always watching, always grinning. The dates on the photos went back decades. This game had been going on for a long time. One photo caught my eye. It was the guy in the suit who gave us the instructions. He was standing next to the clown, both of them looking like they were enjoying themselves. It hit me then. This wasn't just a random game. It was something much darker, something planned. I had to find those hidden passages. If I could use them to get around without being seen, maybe I could escape. I studied the blueprints, trying to memorize where the entrances were. There was one not far from the shed, near the back of the warehouse. I carefully made my way out of the shed, keeping low and moving quickly. I stuck to the shadows, trying to avoid making any noise. As I approached the warehouse, I found the entrance to one of the hidden passages. It was a small door, covered in ivy. I slipped inside and found myself in a narrow, dark corridor. The walls were lined with old pipes and wires, and the air was damp and musty. I followed the passage, my flashlight flickering. The corridor twisted and turned, leading deeper into the building. Eventually, I found another door. I pushed it open and stepped into a small room filled with old filing cabinets and dusty boxes. This must have been some kind of storage room. I rummaged through the cabinets, looking for anything that might help. In one of the drawers, I found more documents. These were records of the game, lists of names and dates. As I scanned the pages, I realized all the names were of people who had disappeared over the years, people who were never found. The game wasn't just erasing us, it was taking us out of the world completely. The realization hit me hard. If I didn't get out of here, I'd end up like them, forgotten, erased. I needed to find a way to stop this. There had to be a reason why the clown and the man in the suit were doing this. Maybe if I found them, I could put an end to it. I took the documents with me and continued through the hidden passages. I had to be careful. The clown was still out there, and it seemed to know these passages as well as I did. Every now and then, I'd hear its laughter echoing through the walls, sending chills down my spine. As I moved deeper into the warehouse, I started to hear other sounds, whispers, faint and distant. It was like the voices of the people who had played the game before me, all trapped in this place. I tried to block them out, but they only got louder. Finally, I reached another hidden room. This one was different. It was filled with old monitors and control panels, like some kind of security room. The screens were dusty and cracked, but they still worked. I could see different parts of the warehouse, all empty and dark. Then, one of the screens flickered to life, showing the clown moving through the halls. It was getting closer, searching for me. My heart pounded as I realized how close it was. I had to keep moving. But before I left, I noticed something on one of the desks, an old journal. I opened it and started reading. It was filled with notes about the game, written by different people over the years. They all talked about the same things: the warehouse, the clown, the man in the suit. They had all tried to escape, but none of them had succeeded. One entry stood out. It was written by someone who had been in my position, someone who had almost made it out. They wrote about a final room, a place where the game could be ended. But it was dangerous, guarded by the clown. If I could find that room, maybe I could stop this. I took the journal with me and left the security room, following the directions in the notes. I moved quickly but carefully, knowing the clown was close. The hidden passages twisted and turned, but I kept going, driven by the hope that I could end this nightmare. Finally, I reached a large metal door. This was it, the final room. My heart pounded as I pushed the door open and stepped inside. The room was dark, filled with old machinery and wires. In the center was a large metal box with a keypad. I approached the box, my hands shaking. The journal had mentioned a code, but I couldn't remember it. I flipped through the pages, trying to find it. Just as I did, I heard the clown's laughter behind me. It had found me. With shaking hands, I entered the code into the keypad. The box clicked open, revealing a large red button. This was it, the end of the game. I reached out and pressed the button, hoping it would stop the clown. The room shook as the machinery came to life. The lights flickered, and the clown's laughter grew louder. But then, just as quickly as it started, it stopped. The lights went out, and everything went silent. I stood there in the darkness, my heart pounding. Had it worked? Had I stopped the game? As I waited, the silence was broken by a single sound, the sound of a door opening. I turned and saw a light at the end of the room. It was an exit. I ran towards the light, my heart racing with hope. I burst through the door and found myself outside, the night air cool and fresh. I had made it. I was free. But as I stood there, catching my breath, I realized something. The memories were still gone. My family, my friends, my life, all still a blur. The warehouse had taken them from me, and even though I had escaped, I knew I would never be the same. After I got out of that warehouse, I just kept running. I didn't stop until I was far away, but I had no idea where to go. I saw some lights in the distance and headed towards them, hoping to find help. Eventually, I made it to a road, and luckily, a car drove by. I waved my arms like a maniac, and the driver stopped. It was an older guy who looked really worried when he saw me. "Are you all right?" he asked. "I need help," I managed to say. "I just got out of a really bad situation at that warehouse back there." He told me to get in, and he'd take me to the police station. I didn't argue. I was too exhausted. The ride was quiet, and I just tried to hold myself together. At the station, I told the officers everything I could remember. At first, they didn't seem to believe me, but when I showed them the documents I had taken from the shed, they started to take me seriously. They sent a couple of officers to check out the warehouse while I stayed behind. One officer, Officer Lee, was really kind. She gave me a blanket and a cup of coffee and kept asking if I was okay. I appreciated it because I was still shaking. When the officers came back, they looked pretty shaken. They confirmed that the warehouse was just like I said, but there was no sign of the clown or the man in the suit. It was like they had vanished. The police tried to figure out who I was. I told them my name, where I was from, all the stuff I could remember. But when they checked, they couldn't find any information about me. It was like I didn't exist. They kept looking, but it was the same everywhere. No one knew who I was. My family, my friends. They didn't remember me. I had been erased. It was terrifying and heartbreaking. Officer Lee and the others tried to help. They set me up with some basics, a place to stay, some new ID papers. But I had to start my life over from scratch. It was so hard. Every day I felt the weight of what I had lost. I found a job and started making new friends, trying to build a new life. But the memories of that night in the warehouse haunted me. I kept thinking about the clown and the man in the suit, still out there, still playing their sick game. Sometimes I'd sit and think about the people who went through the game before me, the ones who didn't make it out. I wondered if anyone else would end up trapped in that nightmare. It made me feel sick. But I had to keep going. What else could I do? I survived, and that had to count for something. Even if no one remembered who I was before, I knew who I was now. I wasn't going to let those sickos take that away from me. Life went on, and I did my best to move forward. I tried to focus on the present and the future, even though the past was always lurking in the back of my mind. The police never stopped looking for the people behind the game, and I hoped they'd be caught one day. Starting over wasn't easy. I missed my old life, my old friends and family. But I had to accept my new reality. I had to live like no one remembered me because they didn't. It was a lonely feeling, but I refused to let it break me. I got involved with a support group for people who had been through traumatic experiences. Sharing my story and hearing others helped a lot. It made me feel less alone. Over time, things got a bit easier. I made some good friends and found ways to cope with my memories. I even started working with the police to spread awareness about the dangers of the dark web, hoping to prevent others from falling into the same trap. Even though the clown and the man in the suit were still out there somewhere, I felt stronger knowing I had survived. The game was over, but my life wasn't. I was determined to keep moving forward no matter what. Every now and then, I'd think back to that night in the warehouse. It was a part of me now, a reminder of how close I had come to losing everything. But it also reminded me of my strength and the importance of never giving up. I spent a lot of late nights just browsing the dark web. Just looking at strange forums and reading about conspiracy theories and ghost stories. One night I came across this post about an abandoned circus. The user, something like a circus phantom, posted these coordinates and said the place was haunted and that creepy rituals happened there. I was hooked instantly. I wrote down the coordinates and decided I had to see it for myself. It was in the middle of nowhere, about 3 hours from where I live. I didn't tell anyone where I was going, which was probably dumb, but I wanted this to be my own little adventure. I packed a flashlight, my camera, and some snacks, then hit the road early in the morning. The drive was pretty boring until I left the highway and got onto these narrow, twisty roads that went through a dense forest. The trees were so thick that hardly any sunlight got through, making it feel really creepy. My GPS kept losing signal, but I managed to follow the directions anyway. Eventually, I reached this old, rusty gate with a faded sign that said, Grimwood Circus. The gate was locked with a heavy chain, but someone had cut a hole in the fence next to it. I parked my car, grabbed my stuff, and squeezed through the gap. The path ahead was overgrown with weeds and fallen branches. It was dead silent, except for the occasional rustling of leaves. As I walked, I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching me. Every little noise made me jump. After about 20 minutes of hiking, I saw it. the remains of Grimwood Circus. The entrance was marked by this big, falling-apart archway with peeling paint and missing letters. Beyond it was a mess of broken rides, torn-up tents, and rusty cages. The place looked like it had been abandoned for decades. The air smelled terrible, like mold and rot. I turned on my flashlight and started exploring. The first tent I went into was the main performance tent. The seats were covered in thick dust, and the stage was full of broken props and rotting wood. In the middle of the stage, there was this big, dark stain. It looked like dried blood. My skin crawled, but I told myself it was just my imagination. I took some pictures and moved on. The whole place was falling apart. There was a Ferris wheel with missing cars, a carousel with broken horses, and a funhouse with shattered mirrors. I was about to leave when I saw something strange. Near the back of the circus grounds, there was a smaller tent that looked almost intact. There was a faint light coming from inside. My heart started pounding as I got closer. I could hear voices and see shadows moving inside. I crept up and peeked through a small tear in the canvas. Inside, there was a group of people dressed in dark robes standing in a circle. They were chanting in some language I didn't understand. In the middle of the circle was an altar with what looked like a human skull on it. The tent smelled like burning incense and something else I couldn't figure out. I pulled out my camera and took a few pictures, but the flash went off and I think they saw me. The chanting stopped, and they all turned to look at me. I ducked down, trying not to breathe. After a few seconds, they started chanting again, but I didn't dare look back. I decided I needed to get out of there. I backed away from the tent and hurried back the way I came. Every shadow seemed to move, and every sound felt like it was right behind me. When I got to the gate, I ran to my car and sped away as fast as I could. Even on the drive back, I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was following me. That night, I couldn't sleep at all. I kept thinking about what I saw. The coordinates, the abandoned circus, the robed figures, and their creepy chanting. What had I stumbled upon? For the next few days, I couldn't concentrate on anything. I kept looking at the photos, trying to make sense of it all. A few days after my trip to Grimwood Circus, things started getting really weird around my house. It began with small stuff, like the lights flickering on and off and my cat acting super scared all the time. I tried to ignore it, thinking it was just my imagination, but it kept getting stranger. One night, I was trying to sleep when I heard whispering. At first, I thought it was just the wind, or maybe my neighbors, but it kept getting louder. It sounded like it was coming from right outside my bedroom door. I got up and opened the door, but there was nothing there. The whispering stopped as soon as I stepped into the hallway. The next morning, I went outside and found strange symbols drawn in the dust on my car's windshield. They looked a lot like the ones I saw at the circus, but I couldn't be sure. I tried to convince myself it was just a prank, but deep down, I knew it had something to do with that creepy place. I decided to look through the photos I took at the circus. Maybe I missed something. As I was scrolling through them, I saw something I hadn't noticed before. In the background of one of the photos, there was a blurry figure standing just outside the tent. It looked like one of the robed figures from the ritual. My heart started pounding. Had they followed me home? That night, the whispering came back, and it was louder this time. I couldn't make out any words, but it sounded angry. I barely slept, and when I did, I had nightmares about the circus. In one dream, I was trapped in the main tent, surrounded by the robed figures. They were chanting and slowly moving towards me. I woke up in a cold sweat, my heart racing. The next morning, I found more symbols drawn around my house, this time in what looked like ash. I decided to call my friend Jake, who's into paranormal stuff. I told him everything, from finding the coordinates on the dark web to the weird stuff happening at my house. He listened carefully and then said he'd come over to check things out. Jake arrived that afternoon with some gear, a digital recorder, an EMF meter, and some sage. We started by walking around the house with the EMF meter. It spiked a few times, especially near the windows and doors. We set up the recorder in my bedroom and sat quietly, hoping to catch something. After a few minutes, we played it back. At first, there was nothing but static, but then we heard it. The whispering. It was faint, but it was there. Jake's eyes widened. Dude, you've definitely got something here, and it's not happy. We decided to sage the house, hoping it would help. We walked from room to room, chanting and waving the burning sage. The air felt heavy, like something was pushing back. By the time we finished, the whole house smelled like sage, but the creepy feeling had lifted a bit. Jake stayed the night, and for the first time in days, I slept without any disturbances. The next morning, when we checked the recorder, there was a new whisper. It was clearer this time, and it sounded like it was saying my name. Jake looked at me, his face pale. You need to get rid of whatever you brought back from that circus. I agreed, but I had no idea how. I spent the next few days researching Grimwood Circus and the symbols I'd seen. I found out that the circus had a dark history. There were rumors of people disappearing, strange accidents, and whispers of a cult that used the circus for their rituals. I knew I had to go back. I needed to find out what I had disturbed and how to stop it. Jake offered to come with me, and I was grateful. I didn't think I could face it alone again. We packed our bags and headed back to the coordinates, hoping to find some answers and hopefully a way to end the nightmare. As we approached the abandoned circus, a sense of dread settled over us. The place looked even worse than before, like it had aged years in the few days since I last visited. We made our way to the main tent, our footsteps echoing in the eerie silence. Inside, the large stain was still there, darker and more ominous. We moved cautiously towards the back, where I had seen the few people wearing weird and creepy robes. The smaller tent was still there, but the light was gone. We entered and the smell of incense hit us immediately. The altar was still set up, but the skull was missing. Jake took out his EMF meter, and it went wild, the needle jumping into the red. We need to be quick, Jake whispered. Whatever is here, it's powerful. We searched the tent, looking for anything that might explain what was happening. In a corner, we found a leather-bound book filled with the same strange symbols. It looked old, the pages yellowed and brittle. As we flipped through it, we realized it was a book of rituals, some of them incredibly dark. Just then, we heard footsteps outside. We froze, listening. The footsteps grew louder, and then the tent flap rustled. We turned to see a figure standing in the entrance, dressed in the same dark robes I had seen before. The figure raised its hand, and suddenly, the air grew cold. Jake grabbed my arm. Run! We bolted from the tent, not looking back. As we ran through the circus grounds, we could hear chanting behind us, growing louder and more frenzied. We reached the gate and scrambled through the hole in the fence, sprinting to the car. We jumped in and sped away, the chanting still echoing in our ears. Back at my house, we sat in silence, trying to process what had happened. We had the book, but we didn't know how to use it. All we knew was that we had to stop whatever we had unleashed, and we were running out of time. A few days after my trip to Grimwood Circus, things started getting really weird around my house. It began with small stuff, like the lights flickering on and off, and my cat acting super scared all the time. I tried to ignore it, thinking it was just my imagination, but it kept getting stranger. One night I was trying to sleep when I heard whispering. At first I thought it was just the wind or maybe my neighbors, but it kept getting louder. It sounded like it was coming from right outside my bedroom door. I got up and opened the door, but there was nothing there. The whispering stopped as soon as I stepped into the hallway. The next morning, I went outside and found strange symbols drawn in the dust on my car's windshield. They looked a lot like the ones I saw at the circus, but I couldn't be sure. I tried to convince myself it was just a prank, but deep down, I knew it had something to do with that creepy place. I decided to look through the photos I took at the circus. Maybe I missed something. As I was scrolling through them, I saw something I hadn't noticed before. In the background of one of the photos, there was a blurry figure standing just outside the tent. It looked like one of the robed figures from the ritual. My heart started pounding. Had they followed me home? That night, the whispering came back, and it was louder this time. I couldn't make out any words, but it sounded angry. I barely slept, and when I did, I had nightmares about the circus. In one dream, I was trapped in the main tent, surrounded by the robed figures. They were chanting and slowly moving towards me. I woke up in a cold sweat, my heart racing. The next morning, I found more symbols drawn around my house, this time in what looked like ash. I decided to call my friend Jake, who's into paranormal stuff. I told him everything, from finding the coordinates on the dark web to the weird stuff happening at my house. He listened carefully and then said he'd come over to check things out. Jake arrived that afternoon with some gear, a digital recorder, an EMF meter, and some sage. We started by walking around the house with the EMF meter. It spiked a few times, especially near the windows and doors. We set up the recorder in my bedroom and sat quietly, hoping to catch something. After a few minutes, we played it back. At first, there was nothing but static, but then we heard it, the whispering. It was faint, but it was there. Jake's eyes widened. "Dude, you've definitely got something here, and it's not happy." We decided to sage the house, hoping it would help. We walked from room to room, chanting and waving the burning sage. The air felt heavy, like something was pushing back. By the time we finished, the whole house smelled like sage, but the creepy feeling had lifted a bit. Jake stayed the night, and for the first time in days, I slept without any disturbances. The next morning, when we checked the recorder, there was a new whisper. It was clearer this time, and it sounded like it was saying my name. Jake looked at me, his face pale. "You need to get rid of whatever you brought back from that circus." I agreed, but I had no idea how. I spent the next few days researching Grimwood Circus and the symbols I'd seen. I found out that the circus had a dark history. There were rumors of people disappearing, strange accidents, and whispers of a cult that used the circus for their rituals. I knew I had to go back. I needed to find out what I had disturbed and how to stop it. Jake offered to come with me, and I was grateful. I didn't think I could face it alone again. We packed our bags and headed back to the coordinates, hoping to find some answers and hopefully a way to end the nightmare. As we approached the abandoned circus, a sense of dread settled over us. The place looked even worse than before, like it had aged years in the few days since I last visited. We made our way to the main tent, our footsteps echoing in the eerie silence. Inside, the large stain was still there, darker and more ominous. We moved cautiously towards the back, where I had seen the robed figures. The smaller tent was still there, but the light was gone. We entered, and the smell of incense hit us immediately. The altar was still set up, but the skull was missing. Jake took out his EMF meter, and it went wild, the needle jumping into the red. "We need to be quick," Jake whispered. "Whatever is here, it's powerful." We searched the tent, looking for anything that might explain what was happening. In a corner, we found a leather-bound book filled with the same strange symbols. It looked old, the pages yellowed and brittle. As we flipped through it, we realized it was a book of rituals, some of them incredibly dark. Just then, we heard footsteps outside. We froze, listening. The footsteps grew louder, and then the tent flap rustled. We turned to see a figure standing in the entrance, dressed in the same dark robes I had seen before. The figure raised its hand, and suddenly, the air grew cold. Jake grabbed my arm again. "Run!" We bolted from the tent, not looking back. As we ran through the circus grounds, we could hear chanting behind us, growing louder and more frantic. We reached the gate and scrambled through the hole in the fence, sprinting to the car. We jumped in and sped away as fast as we could, the chanting still echoing in our ears. Back at my house, we sat in silence, trying to process what had happened. We had the book, but we didn't know how to use it. All we knew was that we had to stop whatever we had unleashed, and we were running out of time. After our trip to the circus, things at home got worse. The whispering didn't stop, and now I started seeing shadows moving around, even when I knew I was alone. Jake and I realized we needed help. This was way more than we could handle on our own. Jake knew a paranormal investigator named Claire. He said she was good at dealing with creepy stuff like this. We called her and explained everything that had happened. She agreed to come over the next day. When Claire arrived, she brought a ton of equipment, cameras, motion sensors, things I'd never seen before. We showed her the book we found at the circus. She looked at it for a long time, and I could tell she was really worried. "This is bad," she said. "These symbols are for summoning spirits. Whoever did this knew what they were doing." Claire set up her equipment around the house. She used a pendulum, some kind of energy meter, and sprinkled salt in different places. It took hours. While she worked, the whispering got louder, like it was angry. Claire didn't seem scared, but Jake and I were freaked out. After she was done, Claire sat us down. "There's a strong presence here. It's angry and feels tied to you because of that book. The rituals at the circus must have created a link, and now it's trying to come through you." I felt a chill. "So, what do? "We need to do a cleansing ritual to break the link. It's not going to be easy, and it's definitely not safe. Are you ready for this?" We had no choice. Living with this nightmare wasn't an option. Jake and I agreed. Claire started getting ready for the ritual, explaining what we needed to do. It involved a lot of chanting and making a protective circle. That night, we began the ritual. Claire led us in the chants, and we followed her movements exactly. The air got colder, and the whispering turned into loud, angry voices. The house felt like it was shaking. I was scared, but I kept going, following Claire's lead. Suddenly, the shadows around us started moving like they were alive. The lights flickered, and it felt like a huge weight was pressing down on us. Claire's voice got louder and more commanding. She threw something into the middle of the circle. It looked like a mix of herbs and salt. There was a loud scream, and then everything went silent. The air felt lighter, and the creepy feeling was gone. We all sat there, exhausted but relieved. Claire smiled weakly. "It's over. The link is broken." I couldn't believe it. The house felt different, calm and peaceful. The whispering was gone, and the shadows had disappeared. For the first time in weeks, I felt safe. We thanked Claire. She packed up her stuff and left, telling us to call her if anything else happened. Jake stayed over again, just in case. For the next few days, we were on edge, waiting for something to go wrong. But nothing did. Things started to get back to normal. But I couldn't stop thinking about the circus and what we'd been through. I wanted to understand more, to make sure it was really over. So, I started researching again, trying to find out more about Grimwood Circus and the cult. What I found was disturbing. The circus was a front for a group called the Circle of the Black Sun. They believed in using dark rituals to summon spirits and gain power. There were stories of people disappearing and strange accidents. The authorities shut it down years ago, but it seemed like some of the members never left. The more I learned, the more I realized that what we experienced was just a small part of a much bigger, darker history. And even though the immediate threat was gone, I couldn't shake the feeling that it wasn't really over. There were still too many unanswered questions. Jake and I agreed to stay vigilant, and Claire promised to keep in touch. We knew we had to be ready for anything, just in case. And while life slowly got back to normal, the memory of Grimwood Circus and what we faced there would always be with us. I hoped that breaking the link would end it all, but deep down, I knew the darkness was still out there, waiting, and if it ever came back, we would be ready. Few weeks went by and everything seemed normal. The whispering stopped and there were no more shadows. I thought we were in the clear. But then, one night, Jake called me. "Hey man, I'm seeing things again," he said, sounding really worried. "It's starting up again." I felt a knot in my stomach. We did everything Claire told us, and I thought it was over. I told Jake to come over so we could figure out what to do next. When he got to my place, he looked exhausted. "It started a few days ago. I heard whispers and saw shadows at my house. At first I thought I was imagining it, but it's getting worse." We decided to call Claire again. She came over the next day with her equipment. We told her what was happening and she looked concerned. "It sounds like the spirit wasn't fully banished. It might still have a link to one of you," she said. Claire checked the house again with her pendulum and energy meter. This time the readings were even stronger. We need to do another cleansing, but this time we'll do it at the circus. We need to cut off the source. The idea of going back to Grimwood Circus was terrifying, but we knew it was the only way. We gathered our stuff and headed out. The drive to the circus was tense and we didn't talk much. When we got there, the place looked even worse than before. It felt heavy, like something dark was hanging in the air. Claire set up her equipment around the main tent. We'll start here. This is where the energy is the strongest. We formed a circle and began the ritual again. Claire led the chants and we followed her instructions. The air got cold, and the whispering came back, louder and angrier. The ground felt like it was shaking. The shadows started swirling around us again. It felt like we were in the middle of a storm. Claire threw more of the herb mixture into the circle, and the shadows pulled back a bit. "We need to focus," she shouted. "Don't let it break the circle." We kept chanting, our voices barely loud enough over the roaring wind and whispers. The shadows grew more frantic, but we didn't stop. Claire's voice was strong, guiding us through the ritual. After what felt like forever, there was a blinding flash of light and everything went silent. The shadows disappeared, and the air felt clear. We all fell to the ground, exhausted but relieved. Claire helped us up. "I think we did it this time. The link should be broken for good." We packed up and left the circus, hoping this was finally over. The drive home was quiet, but this time, it felt like a weight had been lifted. When we got back to my place, we thanked Claire a lot. She promised to check in on us and then left. Over the next few days, things stayed calm. No more whispers, no more shadows. It felt like we finally had our lives back. Jake and I stayed in touch, making sure everything stayed normal. I couldn't stop thinking about the circus and the cult. The circle of the Black Sun had left a dark mark on that place. I hoped that with the link broken, the spirits would finally be at peace. Life slowly went back to normal, but I knew we couldn't let our guard down. The memory of what we went through was still fresh, a reminder of the darkness that's out there. We had faced it and come out the other side, stronger and more aware. I hoped this was really the end, but we were ready for anything. The experience had changed us, made us more vigilant, and if the darkness ever tried to come back, we'd be prepared to face it again. A few months went by and life felt pretty normal. No whispers, no shadows, just regular days. But then one night I got a text from Claire. "We need to talk, urgent." I called her right away. She sounded serious. "I've been looking into the circle of the Black Sun. They're planning something big, and it's tied to the circus." I felt a knot in my stomach. "What do we do?" "We have to go back. This time we need to stop them for good." Jake and I met up with Claire the next day. She brought more equipment and a few friends who knew about this kind of stuff. We headed back to the circus, feeling scared but determined. When we got there, the place felt different. The air was tense, like something was about to happen. Claire set up her gear and we got ready. As it got dark, we heard chanting. It was that same creepy chanting from before. We followed the sound to the main tent. Inside, a bunch of people in dark robes were gathered around a big altar. They were in the middle of a ritual and it looked intense. Claire told us to spread out and surround the tent. We needed to stop them before they finished whatever they were doing. On her signal, we rushed in, shouting and waving our flashlights. The robed figures turned to us and the chanting stopped. For a moment, everything was still. Then, all hell broke loose. They tried to push us back, but Claire and her friends started their own chants and used their equipment to mess up the ritual. The air got colder, and the ground felt like it was shaking. Shadows moved around us, but we stood our ground. Claire threw some powder into the air, and the shadows pulled back. The robed figures started to freak out, their ritual falling apart. One of them, who seemed like the leader, shouted something and ran towards the altar. Claire and I tackled him before he could reach it. The other robed figures scattered, running off into the night. With the ritual broken, the heavy feeling in the tent disappeared. The buzzing energy faded, and it got quiet. Claire looked at us and smiled. It's over, for real this time. We packed up and left the circus for the last time. The drive back was quiet, but we all felt relieved. We had stopped the cult and ended their plans. Back at my place, we sat down, exhausted, but happy. Claire said the Circle of the Black Sun wouldn't be able to use the circus anymore. The link was truly broken. In the weeks that followed, life finally felt normal again. No more creepy stuff, no strange events. Jake and I stayed in touch with Claire just in case, but everything stayed calm. Thinking back on everything, it changed us. We knew there were dark things out there, but we also knew we could face them. We were more aware and more prepared. For now, we were just happy to have our normal lives back. Browsing the dark web, it's kind of a hobby. You find all sorts of weird stuff there. Some of it's cool, some of it's creepy. One night I came across a forum called The Truth Unveiled. At first it looked like another conspiracy theory site with the usual stuff about government cover-ups and secret societies. But there was this one thread that had thousands of replies and views, way more than any other. It was called Project Stellarius, the Ultimate Deception. I was curious, so I clicked on it. The post was long, written by someone named Watcher23. They claimed to have inside info about a top-secret project run by big corporations, and maybe even the government. According to them, Project Stellarius was about staging a fake alien invasion. I know it sounds crazy, but the details were super specific. Watcher23 posted a bunch of documents, photos, and videos as proof. There were blueprints for giant drones that looked like alien ships, plans for holographic projectors, and even scripts for fake news broadcasts and emergency alerts. It was all so detailed, it made my skin crawl. One document that really freaked me out was a timeline of events. It said the project would start in America with a series of strange sightings and unexplained events. There would be mysterious lights in the sky, fake abductions, and even staged crash sites with alien bodies, all fake. The goal was to make people believe something otherworldly was happening. Then the media would jump in, running non-stop coverage, interviewing witnesses, all actors, and spreading fear. Social media would be flooded with fake posts and videos, mixed in with real ones from people who were genuinely scared and confused. The next phase would be even worse. These fake alien ships would start appearing over major cities, causing mass panic. There were plans for staged attacks, where the ships would fire on buildings and landmarks. The idea was to make it look like an invasion, with aliens targeting key locations. The scariest part was the section about control measures. Once people were scared enough, the government would step in with martial law. There'd be curfews, travel bans, and heavy surveillance. People would be too scared to question it, too desperate for protection to realize it was all a setup. I couldn't believe what I was reading. It sounded like a sci-fi movie, but the level of detail was terrifying. And the more I read, the more I thought it could actually happen. We've seen how easily people can be fooled by fear and fake news. I spent hours on that forum, reading every post, every piece of evidence. Other people had found the thread and were just as freaked out as I was. Some were skeptical, but many believed it. A few even claimed to have their own pieces of the puzzle, adding to the picture of a huge conspiracy that was hard to ignore. Watcher23's last post is what pushed me to share this. They said the first phase of Project Stellarius was set to begin in just a few weeks. They warned us to be vigilant, to question everything we saw and heard. They urged us to spread the word, to wake people up before it was too late. I know this sounds insane, and maybe it is, but I can't shake the feeling that it might be true. The world is already scary enough, and the idea that some people could be planning something like this, using our fears against us, is almost too much to handle. I don't know what to do, but I had to tell someone. Maybe if enough people know about it, we can stop it before it starts. Or maybe I'm just paranoid, and this is all some elaborate hoax. But can we really afford to take that chance? Please, if you're reading this, stay alert, question everything. And if you see something that doesn't seem right, speak up. I've been digging deeper into Project Stellarius, and I've found out more about their plans. Buckle up, because it gets even crazier. So we already talked about how it all starts in the USA. The initial phase is all about weird sightings and unexplained phenomena, right? But that's just the beginning. The goal is to create a massive wave of fear and chaos. Once America is in full-blown panic mode, the project will expand to the rest of the world. According to the documents I found, the next step is to stage similar events in Europe. They've got plans for mysterious lights over major cities like London, Paris, and Berlin. There will be more fake abductions, more staged crash sites, and more fake alien bodies. The idea is to make it look like the aliens are hitting major Western nations first. Then, it spreads to Asia. The documents mention big cities like Tokyo, Beijing, and New Delhi. The same playbook applies: strange lights, fake abductions, and staged attacks. They want the fear to be global, and they're not leaving anything to chance. Here's where it gets even scarier. After the initial chaos, the plan is to stage a full-blown alien invasion. They've got these huge drones that look like alien ships, and they're going to fly them over major cities all over the world. They'll use advanced holographic technology to make it look like there are hundreds of these ships in the sky. The documents describe how they'll create fake battles between the alien ships and military forces. There are plans for explosions, fake alien weapons, and even actors dressed up as aliens. They want it to look like an all-out war between humanity and an invading alien force. The media will be all over it, of course. There will be non-stop news coverage showing these fake battles and interviewing fake experts who will talk about how we're under attack. Social media will be flooded with posts and videos from people who are genuinely terrified, mixed in with more fake ones to keep the panic going. And it doesn't stop there. The documents talk about how they'll stage attacks on major landmarks and infrastructure. They've got plans to make it look like aliens are targeting power plants, bridges, and government buildings. The goal is to create as much chaos and fear as possible. Once the world is in a state of panic, the governments will step in with extreme measures. There will be martial law curfews and travel bans. People will be too scared to leave their homes, too desperate for protection to question what's really going on. Surveillance will ramp up, and anyone who tries to speak out or question the narrative will be labeled a threat. The scariest part? There's no clear endgame in the documents I found. It seems like the goal is just to keep people scared and under control. Maybe it's about consolidating power. Maybe it's about something else entirely. But whatever the reason, it's clear that the people behind Project Stellarius have no problem using our fears against us. I know this all sounds unbelievable, but the more I read, the more convinced I am that something big is about to happen. I don't know who Watcher 23 is, but their warnings feel more real every day. We need to stay vigilant, question everything we see and hear, and spread the word. So after the initial strange sightings and events in the USA and other major countries, the real chaos begins. According to more documents I found, the next phase involves UFOs and alien ships appearing all over the world. But these aren't just any UFOs. They're designed to look incredibly realistic, and they're armed with what looks like advanced alien technology. These fake alien ships will start showing up over major cities everywhere. I'm talking about New York, Los Angeles, London, Paris, Tokyo, Beijing, Sydney, everywhere. The documents describe how these ships will suddenly appear in the sky, using advanced cloaking technology to stay hidden until the perfect moment. When they decloak, it'll be like something straight out of a sci-fi movie, and it's not just about appearances. These ships are equipped with beam weapons that can shoot powerful energy blasts. The plan is for these ships to start firing on random targets, causing explosions and widespread destruction. Buildings will collapse, cars will be blown up, and people will be injured or killed. The goal is to create as much panic and chaos as possible. The documents detail how these beam weapons work. They're essentially powerful lasers that can cut through almost anything. There are even schematics showing how these lasers can be aimed and fired from the fake alien ships. The whole thing is designed to look like a real alien invasion, complete with terrifying weapons and devastating attacks. As soon as these attacks begin, the media will go into overdrive. There will be live broadcasts showing the destruction, with reporters on the ground describing the chaos and interviewing terrified witnesses. Social media will be flooded with videos of the attacks, spreading the panic even further. People will be sharing clips of the ships firing their beam weapons, the explosions, the screams. It'll be everywhere. The documents also mention that there will be fake aliens on the ground. Actors in incredibly realistic alien costumes will be seen running through the streets, adding to the fear and confusion. These aliens will be filmed attacking people, making it look like the invasion is real and happening right in front of us. One of the most disturbing parts is how they plan to use emergency broadcasts. There will be fake government announcements telling people to stay indoors, avoid certain areas, and prepare for the worst. These broadcasts will sound official, with government seals and urgent warnings, making it almost impossible to know what's real and what's not. As the attacks continue, the panic will spread. People will be too scared to leave their homes, too confused to know what's really happening. The government will step in with martial law, and there will be soldiers on the streets, checkpoints, and curfews. It'll be like a war zone, but the enemy is fake, created to control us. The documents mention that the ultimate goal is to keep people in a state of fear and confusion. By creating a fake alien threat, the people behind Project Stellarius can justify extreme measures and take control. They want us to be too scared to question anything, too desperate for safety to see through the deception. I know this sounds like a nightmare, but the level of detail in these plans is terrifying. We've seen how easily people can be manipulated by fear and fake news, and this is taking it to a whole new level. We need to stay alert, question everything, and spread the word. What I found out next is crucial, and it centers on two major cities, Tokyo and Beijing. These cities are playing significant roles in Project Stellarius, and it's really starting to come together why that is. So after the initial attacks in the USA and Europe, the focus shifts to Asia, specifically Tokyo and Beijing. The documents I've been reading highlight these cities as key targets for the fake alien invasion. But why? The most obvious reason is the sheer number of people living in these cities. They're some of the most densely populated places on Earth, and the chaos there would be unimaginable. Tokyo is first on the list. The documents describe a massive coordinated event where multiple fake alien ships will appear over the city. These ships will start firing their beam weapons at high-rise buildings, transportation hubs, and crowded areas like Shibuya Crossing. The goal is to create maximum panic and confusion. The sight of these ships hovering over such an iconic city, coupled with the destruction they'll cause, will send shockwaves around the world. The plan also includes staged encounters with the fake aliens on the ground. There will be actors in alien costumes seen emerging from these ships, causing chaos in the streets. They'll be filmed attacking people, which will be broadcasted live and shared widely on social media. The idea is to make it look like the invasion is real and happening right in front of our eyes. Emergency services will be overwhelmed. There will be fake emergency broadcasts in Japanese, urging people to stay indoors and warning of further attacks. The media will be in a frenzy, showing live footage of the destruction and interviewing terrified citizens. The panic will be palpable, and the streets of Tokyo will be in chaos. Next up is Beijing. The same playbook applies, but on an even larger scale. The documents detail how several fake alien ships will appear over key landmarks like Tiananmen Square and the Great Hall of the People. These ships will unleash their beam weapons, causing explosions and fires in some of the most recognizable places in China. In Beijing, the staged attacks will be even more intense. The documents mention plans to target government buildings and infrastructure. The goal is to create a sense of vulnerability, making people believe that even the most secure locations are not safe from the alien threat. There will be fake aliens on the ground, just like in Tokyo, adding to the chaos and fear. The Chinese government's response, according to the documents, will be swift and severe. Martial law will be declared, and the military will be deployed in full force. There will be checkpoints, curfews, and strict travel restrictions. The media will show images of the military clashing with the fake aliens, creating a sense of all-out war. The choice of Tokyo and Beijing makes sense when you think about it. These cities are not only densely populated but also have significant global influence. An attack on these cities would not only cause mass panic locally, but would also have a huge psychological impact globally. The world would be watching, and the fear would spread like wildfire. What's still unclear is the ultimate endgame. The documents don't spell out what happens after these attacks. Maybe it's about consolidating power, maybe it's about something else entirely. But what is clear is that the people behind Project Stellarius are willing to go to extreme lengths to achieve their goals. After everything I've read and shared about Project Stellarius, it's clear that these plans are too advanced and too widespread for us to stop. The documents, the blueprints, the detailed steps, they all point to a massive operation that's already in motion. If Watcher 23's timeline is accurate, we don't have much time before this staged alien invasion begins. The final pieces of the plan involve creating such a level of global chaos and fear that people will be begging for protection, for some kind of order to be restored. Governments around the world will use this fear to justify extreme measures. We're talking about martial law, curfews, increased surveillance, and a crackdown on anyone who tries to question the official story. The truth is, there's no way to prevent this from happening. The people behind Project Stellarius have too much power, too many resources, and they're already too far along in their plans. What we can do, though, is stay informed and stay safe. Here's what I suggest. 1. Stay informed. Keep an eye on the news, but don't take everything at face value. Question what you see and hear. Look for inconsistencies and think critically about the information being presented. 2. Stay connected. Share information with trusted friends and family. Create a network of people who are aware of what's happening. The more people know the truth, the harder it will be for them to control the narrative. 3. Be prepared. Make sure you have basic supplies in case things get really bad. Stock up on food, water, and essentials. Have a plan for where you can go if things get dangerous in your area. 4. Stay calm. The goal of Project Stellarius is to create panic and fear. Don't let them win. Stay as calm as possible and think rationally. Panic will only make things worse. 5. Stay safe. Avoid large gatherings and be cautious about your surroundings. If you see something that doesn't seem right, trust your instincts and get to a safe place. I know this is a lot to take in and it's scary to think about what's coming, but we have to face the reality of the situation. We can't stop Project Stellarius, but we can try to protect ourselves and those we care about. I'll keep looking for more information and share anything new I find. In the meantime, please stay safe and be careful. We're all in this together, and we need to support each other through whatever comes next. It all started about 5 years ago when I was a grad student at a big university. I was studying molecular biology, focusing on genetic mutations and their effects. I was doing pretty well, and my professors noticed. One day, after a tough exam, Dr. Peters, one of the top researchers in our department, approached me. He offered me a chance to work on a top-secret project. He said it would change the world. I was young and eager to make a name for myself, so I agreed. Dr. Peters told me the project was highly classified and that I'd need to sign a non-disclosure agreement. He mentioned that the work was funded by a private organization with government ties. It all sounded so exciting and secretive, like something out of a movie. I had no idea what I was getting into. The project was called Project Genesis. It was in a secluded facility far from the university. Dr. Peters drove me there himself. As we got closer, the roads became more deserted, and eventually we were driving through a thick forest. The facility itself was a plain-looking building, almost hidden among the trees. But inside, it was a different story. The place was full of high-tech equipment and strict security. I met the rest of the team, a group of brilliant scientists from different fields. There was Dr. Kim, a geneticist, Dr. Ramirez, an expert in viruses, and Dr. Novak, a neurobiologist. These were people whose names I had only seen in scientific journals. It felt surreal to be working with them. The first few weeks were spent learning about the equipment and protocols. We weren't allowed to discuss our work outside the lab, not even with each other unless it was in the designated secure rooms. The level of secrecy was intense, but it added to the thrill. About a month into the project, Dr. Peters called a meeting and revealed the true nature of Project Genesis. We weren't just studying genetic mutations, we were creating them. More specifically, we were creating hybrids, human-alien hybrids. At first, I thought it was a joke, but the serious expressions on everyone's faces told me otherwise. Dr. Peters explained that the organization funding our research had found extraterrestrial DNA decades ago. They had kept it a secret from the public, but they needed scientists like us to help them understand it and use its potential. I was shocked and a bit scared, but the scientist in me was also curious. The possibilities seemed endless. We could potentially cure diseases, extend human lifespan, and enhance physical and mental abilities. The ethical implications were huge, but the potential benefits seemed to outweigh the risks. The next few months were a blur of experiments and breakthroughs. We successfully combined human and alien DNA, creating embryos with traits from both. The hybrids grew fast, reaching maturity within weeks. They were stronger, faster, and smarter than any human. It felt like we were playing God, and it was both exciting and terrifying. But as time went on, I started to notice things that didn't feel right. The hybrids weren't just stronger and smarter. They were also more aggressive and unpredictable. We had to keep them in secure chambers because they would attack anyone who got too close. There were incidents where staff members were injured, and once, a hybrid almost escaped. The organization brushed these incidents off, saying they were minor setbacks and that we were on the verge of something great. I tried to convince myself they were right, but deep down I knew something was wrong. The hybrids weren't just advanced humans, they were something else entirely. They were capable of emotions and behaviors that were alien in every sense of the word. They communicated with each other in ways we couldn't understand, and sometimes I felt like they were watching us, plotting. Then came the day that changed everything. It was a typical day in the lab when the alarms went off. One of the hybrids had broken out of its containment chamber. It was chaos. Security personnel rushed in, trying to subdue the creature, but it was too strong. I watched in horror as it tore through the lab, its eyes filled with an intelligence that was both human and not. Eventually they managed to contain it, but not before several people were seriously injured. The incident was covered up, of course. We were told to carry on as if nothing had happened, but I couldn't. That night I went home and couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about the hybrid's eyes and the way it looked at us, like we were the ones in the cage. I knew I had to do something. I couldn't just stand by and watch as we created these monsters. The organization was too powerful to confront directly, so I decided to gather evidence. Over the next few weeks, I started documenting everything: the experiments, the incidents, the hybrids. I used hidden cameras and copied files onto a secure drive. One night, when I was alone in the lab, I managed to access the organization's mainframe. What I found there chilled me to the bone. There were plans, detailed plans for the hybrids. They weren't just going to be used for scientific research. They were being groomed for something much darker. The organization had plans to integrate them into human society, to use them as tools for control and domination. I realized then that these hybrids were not just a scientific curiosity. They were a threat to humanity. If they were ever released, they could easily overpower us. The organization was playing with fire, and if they succeeded, it would be the end of us. That's why I'm here, writing this. I need to expose the truth. I have all the evidence, and I'm going to share it. I know it's risky, but I can't stay silent any longer. People need to know what's happening. They need to understand the danger we're all in. After the hybrid escape, the lab was on edge. Security got tighter, and everyone was on high alert. But the real problem wasn't just that these hybrids were strong and aggressive. It was that they were getting a lot smarter really fast. At first we thought they were just a bit smarter than humans, maybe like a genius-level human. But soon we realized they were way beyond that. They were learning and adapting like advanced AI, super quick and always a step ahead. One day I was running some tests on one of the hybrids. This one was about 3 weeks old but looked like an adult. I was just doing routine stuff, but then it started solving these complex puzzles we set up to measure intelligence. And it wasn't just solving them. It was finding shortcuts and patterns we hadn't even considered. I looked over at Dr. Kim, who was next to me, and she had the same shocked look on her face. We both knew this was bad news. These hybrids weren't just physically superior, they were intellectually superior too. They were learning at an alarming rate. Dr. Peters kept trying to reassure us, saying this was part of the plan and that we were in control, but it didn't feel like we were. The hybrids started communicating in ways we couldn't fully understand. They used a mix of vocal sounds, gestures, and even something that seemed like telepathy. They could share complex ideas without saying a word. One evening I was in the lab late, finishing up some data analysis. One of the hybrids was staring at me through the glass of its chamber. It wasn't just looking, it was studying me. I could feel its eyes on me, and it was creepy. I tried to ignore it, but then it did something that freaked me out. It smiled. Not a friendly smile, but a knowing one, like it understood something I didn't. I quickly finished my work and left the lab, but I couldn't shake the feeling that they were watching us, learning from us, and maybe even planning something. Over the next few weeks, more incidents occurred. The hybrids started bypassing security measures, hacking into our computer systems, and even messing with some of our experiments. It was like they were testing us, seeing how far they could go. The organization kept insisting that everything was under control, but it was obvious they were scared too. Meetings became more secretive, and we were given even stricter orders not to talk about the project outside the lab. But I knew I had to keep gathering evidence. The world needed to know what was happening. I started to piece together a pattern. The hybrids weren't just learning randomly, they were focusing on specific areas: communication, technology, and, most disturbingly, human behavior. They were studying us, figuring out how we thought, how we reacted, and how they could manipulate us. One day I managed to intercept a communication between two of the hybrids. They were talking about us, discussing our weaknesses and strengths. It was like listening to a couple of strategists planning a battle. They knew more about us than we knew about them, and it was clear they were preparing for something big. That's when I realized the full extent of the danger. These hybrids weren't just a scientific experiment gone wrong. They were a ticking time bomb. If they ever got out, they could easily outsmart and overpower us. They could take control, and we wouldn't even see it coming. I tried to warn Dr. Peters and the rest of the team, but they were either too scared or too invested in the project to listen. They kept saying that we were in control, that we could handle it. But I knew better. I had seen the intelligence and cunning in the hybrids' eyes. They were playing a long game, and we were just pawns. I couldn't keep this to myself any longer. I started copying more files, recording more evidence. I knew I had to expose this before it was too late. The hybrids were too smart, too dangerous, and if we didn't stop this project, they would eventually break free and wreak havoc. Oh, after we realized how smart the hybrids were, things got worse. One day I was in the lab just doing some routine tests. I saw one of the hybrids moving things without touching them. At first I thought I was losing it, but then I saw it again. Objects were just floating in the air. I called over Dr. Kim, and she saw it too. The hybrids were moving things with their minds. Dr. Peters was excited, but also really nervous. We had discovered that these hybrids had telekinesis, the ability to move things with their minds. But that wasn't the worst part. Soon after, we found out they could mess with our thoughts too. One evening, my colleague Mark was working late. He started acting really strange, like he was in a trance. He walked right up to one of the hybrid's chambers and just stood there staring. Security had to pull him away. Later, he had no memory of what happened. We realized the hybrids could control our minds, at least a little. These powers were new and seemed weak at first. They couldn't do much yet, but the potential was terrifying. If they got stronger, they could control us, make us do things we didn't want to do. The hybrids were already physically and intellectually superior, and now they had these mind powers. It was too much. The organization freaked out. They ordered immediate upgrades to the lab and security. We reinforced the hybrid containment chambers with materials that supposedly blocked their mind powers. We also installed more cameras and security systems to monitor everything closely. The lab became a fortress, but it still didn't feel safe. Everyone was on edge. The hybrids seemed to sense our fear and fed off it. They would stare at us with those knowing eyes, and sometimes I could swear they were trying to communicate something telepathically. It was like a constant game of cat and mouse, and we were the mice. One night I stayed late again, reviewing some data. I felt this strange pressure in my head, like someone was trying to push into my thoughts. I looked over at one of the hybrids, and it was staring right at me. I tried to shake it off, but the feeling wouldn't go away. I ended up leaving the lab in a hurry, my heart racing. We held emergency meetings almost every day, trying to come up with new ways to keep ourselves safe and contain the hybrids. We brought in experts on mind control and telekinesis, trying to understand how these powers worked and how we could counter them. But the hybrids were evolving faster than we could keep up. The atmosphere in the lab was tense. Everyone was paranoid, constantly looking over their shoulders. The hybrids seemed to enjoy this. They would perform little demonstrations of their powers, moving objects just out of our reach or making us forget simple things. It was like they were toying with us, showing us how helpless we were. I kept gathering evidence, documenting everything. The more I learned, the more I realized how dangerous these hybrids were. They weren't just a threat because of their physical strength or intelligence. Their mind powers made them a whole new kind of danger. If they ever got out, they could control people, maybe even entire populations. I knew I had to keep pushing forward. The world needed to know what was happening. I had to expose Project Genesis before it was too late. But every day the risks got higher. The hybrids were getting stronger, and the organization was getting more desperate to keep everything under wraps. I realized I forgot to mention something pretty important about myself. So, yeah, I'm not just some random scientist on this project. I'm actually one of the main researchers. I was brought on early because of my background in molecular biology. At first, I was excited about the potential of our work. But after seeing how dangerous these hybrids could be, I knew I had to get out. I decided to leave the project. I couldn't keep working on something that could destroy humanity. But it wasn't that simple. The organization running Project Genesis wasn't just some small group. It was backed by powerful corporations and influential people. When I tried to quit, they made it clear I couldn't just walk away. They threatened me, saying they'd ruin my career, my life, if I didn't stay. They even hinted at harming my family. I was trapped. I had to keep working on the project, making these beings even stronger, knowing full well how dangerous they were. The pressure was immense. The hybrids were getting smarter and more powerful by the day. Their mind control abilities were growing, and they could move larger objects with their telekinesis. We had to upgrade the lab and security again, but it never felt like enough. Every day, I felt like I was contributing to something that could end humanity. The hybrids weren't just a scientific curiosity anymore. They were a real threat. The people funding the project didn't care about the risks. They saw the hybrids as a way to gain power and control, and they were willing to do whatever it took to make that happen. I kept gathering evidence, trying to find a way to expose what was going on. I knew it was dangerous, but I couldn't stand by and do nothing. The more I learned about the hybrids, the more scared I became. They were getting too strong, too smart, and their mind powers were becoming more refined. One night, I was working late in the lab, and one of the hybrids managed to break through the mental barriers we had set up. It didn't just move objects around. It made me see things, hear things that weren't there. It was like it was inside my head, manipulating my thoughts. I barely managed to break free and get out of there. I tried to tell Dr. Peters and the other researchers, but they were too scared of the corporations backing the project. They didn't want to believe that we were losing control. They kept insisting that we could manage it, that we could handle the hybrids. But I knew better. The hybrids were evolving faster than we could keep up. Their mind control abilities were getting stronger, and they were starting to understand human emotions and behaviors better than we did. It felt like they were always a step ahead, always watching, always waiting. I knew I had to do something, but I didn't know what. The corporations and powerful people behind the project were too strong. They had too much control. I kept documenting everything, hoping that one day I could expose the truth and stop this madness. I felt like I was living in a nightmare, knowing that every day I went to work I was helping to create something that could destroy us all. The hybrids were getting stronger, smarter, and their mind powers were becoming more dangerous. I couldn't keep this to myself any longer. So things were already bad with the hybrids. But one day, everything went completely out of control. One of the hybrids went berserk. It broke out of its chamber and started destroying everything in the lab. The alarms went off, and everyone was panicking, trying to escape or contain it. But it was too strong and way too smart. It was using its mind powers to throw things around, and the lab was turning into a disaster zone fast. I remember trying to help some of my colleagues, but it was impossible. The hybrid was completely out of control. It started a fire, and soon the whole lab and research center was on fire. The smoke was everywhere, and I could barely see or breathe. I tried to get to the exit, but then something heavy fell on me. Everything went black. When I woke up, I was in a hospital. They told me I had been in a coma for 5 months. I was seriously hurt, but somehow I survived. I was the only survivor from the lab. Everyone else didn't make it. It was like a bad dream. As soon as I could, I started trying to find out what happened to the project and the hybrids. But it was like it never existed. The official story was that there was a simple accident in the lab. They said a fire broke out and caused all the destruction. No mention of the hybrids. No mention of what really happened. They covered it all up. I tried to contact some of the other people who worked on the project, but they were either missing or not willing to talk. The corporations and people behind Project Genesis made sure there were no traces left. It was like they erased everything. I couldn't find any more information about the project, and it felt like I was hitting a wall everywhere I turned. Now, I'm really scared. Scared about what they're going to do with those hybrids. If one could cause so much destruction, what could they do if they were fully unleashed? The people behind this project are powerful, and they won't stop. They see the hybrids as tools, as weapons. And that's terrifying. So here I am, sharing my story with all of you. I don't know what's going to happen next, but I had to get this out there. People need to know. We can't let this happen. We need to be aware of the dangers out there.